Hello, everybody. Welcome into GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, February 6th. I hope everybody is having a great day so far. The trade deadline has come and gone in the NBA. A couple major moves to go over from yesterday and last night, as well as a couple buzzer beaters that got in just before that 3 o'clock deadline. Then we'll talk about winners and losers of the whole thing before getting into the MLB just a little bit. But before we do any of that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, February 6th. But like I was saying, lots of big news surrounding the NBA as it has completely taken over this week in sports talk, right? Massive trades up and down, but of course we're going to start off with the big one from last night. Jimmy Butler is off the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat are finally able to move past the Jimmy Butler issue. And it lasted about 2 months. Jimmy Butler started this saga almost 3 months ago, dating back to 2024, where he first was injured, suspended, wanted a new contract, wasn't going to be able to get it with the Heat. He then goes on to throw one of the biggest tantrums that we have seen in a very long time in sports, right? Especially in the NBA. But what he's able to get out of it is he's able to find a way to play with Steph Curry. Now, not only that, he's able to get a new contract. Now, this trade as a whole, we kind of reacted to it live when it happened yesterday, but let's take a step back because it had a lot of moving parts. It had a lot of teams going in and out of it. There are teams that are still trying to figure out what's going to happen, but now it went from what potentially could have been a 5-team trade down to what is now a 4-team trade. Jimmy Butler is the main piece in this one. He moves across the country from Miami to Golden State. We'll start with that one, right? The Golden State Warriors were desperate for a deal. There was a deal at least sort of in place involving Kevin Durant and Jimmy Butler that would have sent Kevin Durant to Golden State, Jimmy Butler to Phoenix, and it would have been a whole kind of triangle swap there, right? Instead, the Phoenix Suns are out of it after Kevin Durant nixes that trade, and Jimmy Butler finds his way over to the Warriors. He's going to play with Steph Curry, and Steph Curry is a special talent, right? A first ballot Hall of Famer, a guy that completely changed the way that we play the sport of basketball. A guy that really helped push towards the full adoption of the three-point shot, the greatest shooter in the history of the NBA. Steph Curry is a guy that can play with just about anybody. That's one of the most special things about him. The way that he can facilitate with the ball, and especially the way that he's able to get open without the ball in his hands. He's a very capable ball handler. He's going to be your team's main ball handler when they have it. But when he gets off the ball, his ability to move, find the open space, just navigate the court is something that's really good as well. And I love the ability that he has to literally play with anybody. Jimmy Butler is going to add a lot to this team. The Warriors have been really bad in the clutch. They've been the worst team in the clutch this season. They've given up the most amount of comeback wins than anybody else in the NBA. What Jimmy Butler's going to be able to do is just stop that bleeding, and I think that's really important. This is not a move when Jimmy Butler goes over to the Warriors that is going to make them a championship level team, right? They're sitting at about 500 right now. This is a very stacked Western Conference, but this is a move that's at least going to give their team hope, give them the ability to play up to the top tier of competition. I still wouldn't put them near the top of the NBA as far as winning a title goes, but because of this move, because they have Jimmy Butler, because they can pair another star alongside Steph Curry, this is a move that I think at least cements them as a top 6 team in the West, making them out of that play-in range. Still a tough Western Conference, and for a team that's sitting around 500, they've got some work to do. They've got some work to do with a depleted roster. They gave up a lot of players in this one, but honestly, they didn't have to give up too much. Being able to give up just one first-round pick for a guy like Jimmy Butler is pretty good. They had to go and sign him to a 2-year, $121 million contract, giving him over $60 million a year, which is a lot. But if he's able to pull off what he's been able to do in the playoffs for the next 2 seasons, Jimmy Butler with the Warriors should be a good fit over there. Now, what do the Miami Heat get in return? We obviously mentioned that they're going to get that 1 first-round pick. It's a protected first-round pick for 2025. So for this year, although that shouldn't make a difference unless the Warriors completely collapse, they also get Andrew Wiggins, who is that next big piece in the trade. They get Kyle Anderson, who was supposed to go to Toronto originally. Instead, the trade falls through, and Miami's going to end up holding on to him. And a reunion with PJ Tucker. PJ Tucker comes back to Miami. He is rejoining the Heat over there. Overall, this move doesn't affect the Heat too much. They were playing without they were playing without Jimmy Butler for almost 2 months at this point, right? Tyler Hero had cemented himself as the all-star on this team. Bam Adebayo has the ability to turn it on. He hasn't been playing particularly great this season, but they've got a lot of young guys that have stepped up in the absence. They're still about a 500 team, and really the Heat and the Warriors are in very similar situations in our power rankings. They're basically right next to each other, right? Having this trade go through, adding a guy like Andrew Wiggins, who's going to help on the defensive end. He's one of the better 3-and-D guys in the league when he's at his best. What he's able to do as a long guard going up against maybe not the best player, but just to be able to defend and slow down some of those top players in the Eastern Conference now, as well as adding an element of shooting on the other end. I think that's going to be huge for this Heat team. Again, much like the Warriors, it's not going to change them into a title contender. They're not going to magically just appear into the top 4, top 5 of the Eastern Conference, but I do think this at least cements them as a playoff team again. This is one that really kind of just had to happen. Jimmy Butler had to get out of there. This isn't a trade that's going to move needles around the NBA. This isn't a trade that I'm going to sit down and say, wow, one team really got fleeced in this one, unless the Warriors are able to make a run. Now, do I think that the Warriors probably won this trade? I do. They were able to get under not just the second apron, but the first apron. And with the new CBA, that's going to be huge as much as they're paying players. Now, they still need to go out and get one more person within the next 2 weeks to fill out that minimum roster size. But I've seen a couple people say that they could just do 10-day contracts so that they don't have to go over that first apron, which they're less than the minimum contract of. It's still going to be a lot better for them as far as the tax money goes. In the luxury tax, they got out of that pretty good. The Heat, on the other hand, they're going to have to figure out how to reduce their roster a little bit. They got a lot of players, a lot of moving pieces. Another really interesting piece of this trade that I think should be talked about is the movement of Dennis Schroeder. Dennis Schroeder, of course, goes to the Warriors from the Nets at the beginning of this season when the Warriors were looking to add some more shooting after a couple injuries happened on their team. Then Dennis Schroeder goes out and gets a lease in San Francisco. He gets traded twice. First, it looked like he was going over to Utah. They were playing Utah, the Golden State Warriors were. They lost that game in yet another comeback fashion. Then, instead of going to Utah, he gets traded to Detroit, and now he joins the Pistons. I like Dennis Schroeder a lot. He's not a guy that, again, is going to be a needle mover, but there weren't a lot of needle movers, really, in this trade. I do think, overall, the Warriors are going to win this trade just by virtue that they got the best player. And they didn't have to give up too much for it. The Heat did about as good as they possibly could. Jimmy Butler, in a perfect world, Jimmy Butler would have fetched a lot more than what they got. In a perfect world, Jimmy Butler wouldn't have created as much noise and drama as he did. Unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world for the Heat, and both of those things didn't happen. Right? The Heat go out there, they don't get the true compensation that they probably would have expected to get if they had just traded him quietly and he hadn't gone out and lost all of the Heat's leverage, right? The Heat had no leverage in this one. All the teams knew that they had to get rid of him. Some teams were turned off by the fact that he was able to do this now with 2 different teams. You can say 2.5 if you say a similar thing happened in Philadelphia, although I just don't really see that in Philly. He did this in Minnesota, and now he's doing this with the Miami Heat. Obviously, he got a little mad at Philadelphia when they chose Tobias Harris over him, but it's not quite the same thing as him forcing his way out of there, right? Jimmy Butler, I think could have handled this situation better, and he might have ended up exactly where he wanted to. He still ends up in one of the 4 places that he listed at the beginning of his trade demands, so everything kind of worked out for him, and he did screw over the Heat a little bit. So if he was trying to be a little bit petty, then everything he did went exactly according to plan. But at the end of the day, the Heat lose. The Heat win by losing this trade, right? The Heat win just by getting Jimmy Butler out of there. The Heat win just by getting a guy that was just going to be a problem for their team off and onto a place where he's not going to be their issue anymore. But let me know what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear them. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, one more massive trade before the trade deadline as the Lakers found their new center late last night. We're going to talk about who they got, whether it was worth the haul that they had to give up to Charlotte, and much more coming up here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, February 6th. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over the Jimmy Butler blockbuster trade that took place almost 24 hours ago. In this segment, the other massive trade that took place over the deadline before it expired at 3 p.m. today as the Lakers find their new center in Mark Williams. We'll talk about what that means for both the Hornets and the Lakers, as well as the compensation in just a second. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, February 6th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the other massive trade that took place right before the buzzer as the Los Angeles Lakers have found a center to be the Anthony Davis replacement. And I think they got one of the better ones out there. Obviously, the Lakers needed a center. They didn't really have a great option after Anthony Davis was traded for Luka Doncic. Overall, they went out there and they did maybe the best job that they possibly could have. They went out and got Mark Williams. Mark Williams, a young center, currently or formerly playing for the Charlotte Hornets. He was out of Duke, and when he's been healthy, which has been a concern for him, he's been amazing, averaging 19 points over his career, 15 points per game this season. He has been he's been one of the better players on that Hornets team. Now, that's not saying too much because this Hornets team is not the greatest, but at 7'2", what he's going to be able to add as a rim protector, as a lob threat for Luka Doncic, like he was able to do with Gafford and Derek Lively down there in Dallas when he was a part of the Mavericks, is going to be really big for this Lakers offense, right? Obviously, the biggest weakness after losing AD was going to be who's going to be the defensive anchor now. And Mark Williams, as he's healthy right now, can step into that role. The Lakers had to give up a lot for a young talent like that. They had to give up first-round rookie Dalton Knecht, as well as Cam Reddish, a former top pick, also out of Duke, a 2031 unprotected first-round pick, and a 2030 pick swap. So that's a lot to give up. That's basically all the assets that they did not give up in the Luka Doncic trade. So you can combine those two trades together. But I think in this one, Charlotte got a better package for Mark Williams than outside of AD than what the Mavericks got for Luka Doncic. Obviously, if you're just taking those superstars one for one, you just look at the pieces outside of those number one players. I think the unprotected first round pick is a huge get for the Hornets. Now, I don't think at this point with Luka Doncic on this team and a really young Lakers offense, really young Lakers team, that it's going to be that great of a pick. But having that pick swap and an unprotected first is going to be huge. It's going to be a huge deal for a Charlotte Hornets team that desperately just needs some more resources. We saw a lot of teams go out there and get some more picks for this season, for next season, for the future, eat up on the salary, but they also get a couple of young, talented pieces. Dalton Knecht has come in and kind of set the league on fire. In what was a weak rookie class, he came in out of Tennessee and took up exactly what the role you were expecting to. He's not a guy who's going to be a superstar player, but you throw him in a 3-and-D situation, throw him in the corner, and he's going to be one of those sharpshooters from deep. He's absolutely great at that role. He did exactly what he's needed to do, and he's been an excellent fit on the Lakers. Getting him over there in Charlotte is going to be great, and they're putting together a little bit of a solid roster over there. It's not a perfect roster, obviously. They're not, competing for championships, but they've got a lot of young talent. They're surrounding LaMelo Ball with a lot of young talent, and getting a guy that can just be a shooter, be a guy that can space the floor and play some good enough defense in Dalton Knecht is going to be big. But this is a big gamble for both of these teams, right? For the Lakers and for the Hornets, you are gambling on the fact that either Mark Williams' health is going to be good if you're the Lakers, or his health is going to be bad. He's had foot issues in the past, and for a guy that's 7'2", that's sometimes a death sentence. Those nagging foot issues can really hurt the career of these big guys, right? That's what one of the concerns was with Zion Williamson and his weight. He was going to get injured with his feet. You saw guys like Yao Ming lose their career over that. There's been plenty of examples in the NBA over the years of talented big men just not being able to stay healthy because they have a nagging foot issue. But he has been really good when he's on the court, and I really do like the fit over there. Again, the Lakers still need to go out and get a long-term option down there, especially as some insurance in case he's unable to stay healthy for his career in LA. But getting a dominant force down low, a guy that's big, tall, and a solid defender is going to be crucial. Now, he's not a perfect defender, right? His last time out against the Lakers, he gave up 42-23 against Anthony Davis. But Anthony Davis is something special, right? That's still not a great stat line to give up, and he's still a guy that I think can really help this Lakers team. But I think the addition of Mark Williams combined with the addition of Luka Doncic puts them into that next tier. The Lakers were kind of in that tier where they were going to make the playoffs. If they got the right matchup, they could potentially win a round, maybe even two if they continued to get lucky with health and matchups. But they weren't going to win a championship, right? They were going to be a second round exit by probably one of those top 4 seeds, right? They were going to make it out of the play-in. They were going to be probably the 6th seed in the West, and they made and with these moves, they're now fighting for those top 4 seeds in the West. Now, a lot of those top teams in the West made some moves, right? I really do like what all those teams were aggressive in the West. The Thunder getting back Chet Holmgren, news today. So that's kind of like a trade deadline acquisition for them. Not quite the same, but you're getting healthy for him. This is going to be a brutal Western Conference playoff route, and I'm very excited by how it goes. Luka Doncic should make his Lakers debut soon once he returns from his injury, but I really like the pieces they're putting together around LeBron James and for the future. Like I said, this is a really, really young Lakers team. This is a Lakers team that outside of LeBron There's not a single person on that roster that is over the age of 30. And being able to get a really good piece from Charlotte like this, still giving up a lot, but not mortgaging the future again, is huge for the future of this Lakers team. And they're going to be dominant for a very long time as long as they continue to make some of these smart moves that they've really, really capitalized on in this trade deadline. But let me know what you thought of this move. I really liked it. I was a big fan of it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll go over the buzzer beater moves, some smaller moves that went out at the deadline. We'll talk about those, some teams that are stockpiling draft picks, and much more coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, February 6th. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over some of the massive trades that took place in the last 24 hours of the trade deadline. In this segment, we turn our attention to some of the smaller ones. Still some big movement from some of these teams that got a couple of key pieces. We'll talk about what those were in the buzzer beater moves of the trade deadline. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, February 6th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the next topic here, that being the buzzer beater moves at the deadline. It's a big deadline day here for the NBA, but there are plenty of smaller moves outside of the Lakers and Jimmy Butler finding new homes. The Wizards continued to make some moves. They continue to stockpile picks. They're now up to 3 or 4 first-round picks this season after taking on the contract of Marcus Smart from the Memphis Grizzlies. In exchange, they give up Marvin Bagley, who has shown a little bit of promise as he continues to bounce around the league. The former top pick of the Kings moves around now to Memphis. They also give up Johnny Davis, also a former top pick, hasn't really worked out in any of his stints, and they also give up 2 second-round picks. Not really too much, right? But this is just another one of those things where Memphis is trying to get rid of some salary. We get Marcus Smart, who wasn't really working out with that team. Marcus Smart is a guy that's getting paid a lot. He came over as a part of that 3-team deal involving Kristaps Porzingis and the Celtics and the Washington Wizards. Hasn't really worked out the way they want to, so they're dumping salary, giving a first-round pick to the Wizards in order to hold on to Smart for just the rest of the season. A couple more moves like that as James Wiseman is on the move again just for some cash. He's a former second overall pick, has continued to bounce around the league, not really found a lot of success. Maybe he can carve out a role for himself over in Toronto. The Clippers sent Kevin Porter Jr. in a 1-for-1 trade for Majon Beauchamp, right? Again, one of those moves that is just not going to make a lot of waves, but some of these guys getting some movement, hopefully finding a new home, will get a little bit of traction for their career. But there were two big moves that took place at the deadline, and they both involved the Atlanta Hawks. The Atlanta Hawks were a little quiet this year, right? They were a team that was kind of on that bubble. I wasn't sure if they were going to sit quietly and do nothing or if they were going to be sellers at the deadline, and it turned out that they were minor sellers at the deadline here. They still have Trae Young, who never really seemed like he was going anywhere. But this is a team that's kind of been stuck in neutral for a while. They tried to pull off a big move a couple years ago, trading for DeJounte Murray. That one just hasn't worked out the way that they wanted to. They've struggled to surround Trae Young with talent, so now they're just trying to get a little bit more. They traded Bogdan Bogdanovic to the Clippers in exchange for some young, talented guards that could potentially step up in new homes, right? Bones Highland and Terrence Mann. Terrence Mann has shown a little bit earlier on in his career, had a couple of big games in some key moments, but overall, this trade is not that big a deal. The Clippers get another shooter, some more scoring as they're getting a little bit healthier, they continue to have to rely on some more options. Getting more options as they prepare for the playoffs is going to be huge, and it never hurts to get a sniper like Bogdanovic back on your team. But the big one, the one that I think was the big buzzer beater move, the Cleveland Cavaliers hadn't done much. They're sitting at the top of the Eastern Conference. They've got a pretty solid roster right now. They go out and they trade some of their depth for a pretty solid depth piece of the Atlanta Hawks. They add DeAndre Hunter. DeAndre Hunter, who's having a career season right now in terms of scoring, 19 points per game for him. He's been really effective for the Hawks. Offensively, defensively, he's at about 1 stock per game, steals plus blocks per game. That's pretty good for the Cavs as they continue to add length and size to an already pretty big and lengthy roster. They give up Karis LeVert, who's gonna play a similar role as DeAndre Hunter. Karis LeVert a little bit older. Karis LeVert hasn't had quite the season that DeAndre Hunter has had, as well as Georges Niang, who's just there to match salary. The thing with the NBA trade deadline and NBA trades in general is you get all these little trades, players for cash, throw in 5 second rounders to go get the money match, and that's why we're seeing with this new CBA 4, 5, 6 team trades. We saw a 6-team trade with Cat and the Minnesota Timberwolves earlier in the summer, as well as this trade with Jimmy Butler that originally started with 5 teams, went down to 4, and was continued to be tinkered with until the last moment. With how complicated the NBA trade deadline has become, with how complicated NBA trades are, all of these moves just continue to need extra teams. So you toss a little pick in there, which is good for some of these teams with a lot of cap space, like the Wizards, like the Hornets, who took a lot of these bad contracts and just added a couple picks. They just added a couple first rounders, a couple second rounders, flipped a couple things around to try and set themselves up to get these players for the future, grab some expiring contracts that teams didn't want, just take on some money to make these trade works. And that's why we're seeing teams like the Jazz, the Wizards, and the Hornets get in on half of these trades that we wouldn't have expected otherwise. Some names that I'm surprised were not moved at the deadline. Guys like Jordan Poole continue to stay on the Wizards there. That one a little bit shocking. I thought the Wizards were going to go full fire sale mode with anyone that wasn't basically a rookie. Jordan Poole's had an up and down season with the Wizards, but he's sort of been the face of that team. After they traded away Kyle Kuzma, he's kind of that number 1 scoring option. He hasn't had his best year, but I thought there was a chance that Jordan Poole could be on the move. Of course, every single year, there's always rumors surrounding plenty of other players, right? There's always rumors surrounding the center out of Indiana. He was not moved as well. He posted on his Twitter, he posted on his social media, he survived yet another one. Miles Turner survived yet another trade deadline staying with Indiana. I think that's good that Indiana didn't get rid of him. I hadn't heard too much around him, potentially the Lakers being interested as they went on their hunt for a center. But all in all, this was a trade deadline that kind of came out of nowhere. Up until Saturday, when Luka Doncic was traded, this seemed like it was going to be a relatively quiet deadline. There wasn't too much rumbling outside of what's going to go on with Jimmy Butler, right? Then Luka Doncic gets traded and everything explodes. We saw massive names get moved around the league. Anthony Davis Luka Doncic, Chris Middleton, Kyle Kuzma, guys like Jimmy Butler and Andrew Wiggins. This was a huge trade deadline as the state of the league has completely flipped, right? Teams are going to be in drastically different locations. De'Aaron Fox has now moved down to San Antonio. Lots of madness going on here. Zach LaVine finally gets traded, moves up to the Sacramento Kings there. This is going to be one of the most impactful trade deadlines that there has been in a long time. We've seen massive trades at the trade deadline. Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant in recent years that have been traded at the deadline, but none of them that I think is going to affect the league as far into the future as this trade deadline here, at least for a long time. You don't generally see trades like the Luka one happen that will affect the way that multiple franchises handle their business for 5-10 years into the future. But this is what we saw in this trade deadline. One that looked like it was going to be quiet turned into one of the more important ones that we have seen in a very long time. But let me know what you thought. Outside of that Anthony Davis-Luka trade, what did you think was the most impactful one? I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have the winners and losers of the trade deadline. A couple winners, a couple losers on each side of the aisle. We'll go over that coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found. For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, February 6th. If you were just tuning in, we've just gone over just about all of the moves that have happened at the trade deadline. We are completely up to date, and now we're on to winners and losers. As always, there are winners and there are losers in these types of things. We're going to make sure we hit each and every one of them. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, February 6th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the winners and losers here for the NBA trade deadline. There are always winners and there are always losers. We're going to start off with the winners here. Of course, we have to have the Lakers on this list. The Lakers are able to make off like bandits. They take what some people might have thought would have only turned into one major star and take it into the surprise move of the season, right? They turn Anthony Davis and a handful of assets into Luka Doncic and Mark Williams. That is a dangerous, dangerous team now. That starting five is going to be a problem, right? Projected starting five after all the moves. You've got Luka Doncic, Austin Reeves, Rui Hachimura, LeBron James, and Mark Williams. That is a dangerous starting five, and it absolutely moves them up into the upper echelons of contender in the NBA. There's no other team that can say they moved up a tier in terms of their chance of winning it all like the Lakers did. For every winners, there are losers here. And I think the Suns are one of the biggest losers in this one. The Suns stood pat with what they had. And the Suns clearly knew that it wasn't working. They were on the phones making those trade markets move. They were in on the Jimmy Butler market, right? They were in on a potential 3-team trade that involved the Heat, the Warriors, KD, or Bradley Beal, right? These are guys that they were looking at moving some of those big contracts. The Suns have to pay the most money in the luxury tax. They're over the second apron by the most. They don't have any flexibility. They're kind of stuck with what they have as a team, especially when their stars just aren't interested in moving or working with them or readjusting their contracts. It's going to put them in a bad spot. The Suns' team design was already not very good, right? They have 3 scorers of the basketball, not a lot of defenders, and they've tried their best to go and fix that. They've tried to build out a competent bench unit, which they've really struggled doing. They've tried to build out some kind of defense, which they've really struggled doing. And I give them credit. They've done a better job this season than they did last season, but injuries have hurt them a little bit. And the fact that they weren't able to move off of any of those major contracts in a year where they were rumored from the beginning to be some of those major players in a lot of these trade scenarios, they just weren't able to get anything done. And because of that, they're a big loser. Back on the winners' sides of things, the Spurs, one of the biggest winners in this. And it's obviously because they got one of the bigger names. And it's not just because they got the biggest name, but because how it's going to set them up for the future. You have a young guard in De'Aaron Fox. He's going to be able to play with Victor Wembanyama, theoretically, for their entire career. This wasn't a move that the Spurs made aggressively. This was a move that they had in reaction to De'Aaron Fox saying that he wants to go and play with Victor Wembanyama. That is a great sign for the future of the Spurs. Not just the fact that they get their guard of the future, but the fact that guys are coming and flocking to play with Victor Wembanyama. It's going to be a lot easier to build a team. You might be able to get players at a discount. You might be able to build this team faster than they previously thought. And getting that first step and showing that interest that NBA guys have in playing with your star player is going to be massive. Now, it all depends on how these two gel. I can't see a world where they don't gel pretty good together, but I can see a world where it doesn't live up to all their expectations. I don't think this automatically puts them into the tier where they're going to make the playoffs 100% this year. They're kind of just on that outside looking in kind of tier in the Western Conference, a Western Conference that's pretty top heavy right now. It doesn't mean that they don't have a chance. I think this is a very, very talented Spurs team. They've got a lot of young talent there as well. So if not this year, then they're going to continue to make those steps up. And with a guy like De'Aaron Fox at the helm, being a number 2 guy for Victor Wembanyama, that's going to be massive for them. And I think that's the perfect role for De'Aaron Fox to play. Another loser, obviously, it's the Mavericks. But I don't think the Mavericks are as big of losers as everybody is making it out to be. Obviously, when you give up a guy like Luka Doncic at age 25, a guy who has made the first team All-Pro all but one season in his entire career, has the 5th most All-Pro, first team All-Pro selections in the entire NBA, and it's just 25, you're going to be a loser. But the fact that they weren't able to get that much compensation back, other than Anthony Davis, who, if these two were the same age, if instead of Anthony Davis being 7 years older than Luka Doncic, they were both 25, this trade might have looked better for the Mavericks. And like I've said before, this trade for the Mavericks in a vacuum of it just being one season or just being 2 seasons isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. I love the vision of a Kyrie Irving, Anthony Davis built team alongside a Klay Thompson that can still be an effective 3-point shooter at times, right? You've got a really solid defense now, one that was top 8 in the league last year, even with the deficiencies of Luka Doncic on that defensive end, and you get one of the best 2-way players in the league. Now, it sucks when you lose the franchise face, right? It sucks that the fans are dejected now, but I still think this is a Mavericks team that can make a little bit of a run. They're still on the loser side of this all. But it doesn't mean that they don't have a shot of making any kind of noise in the playoffs this year at all. Another winner from this year, I think the Warriors were as close to winners as they possibly could have been. They didn't have to give up too much to get a second star for Steph Curry, and they were desperate for a second star. They're not A-plus winners. If I had to give them a grade for the deadline, I'd probably give them like a B-, right? They were able to get that second star in Jimmy Butler without giving up too much, only one first-round pick, and it's a top 10 protected pick. So if anything were to happen this season, they still have that protection. They had to give up a lot of money. They're able to Jimmy Butler. $60 million a year is a lot of money for a guy in Jimmy Butler who hasn't been the most consistent regular season player, but in the playoffs, he's worth all that money and more, at least through his history, right? Getting Steph Curry a guy that can step up when they need him to. Getting Steph Curry a guy that can be relied on when the rest of the team isn't stepping up, like they've had so many problems this season, especially at the end of games. Having a guy that can close it out, keep the energy up when they need the energy to stay up, even when they're up big. That's been something that the Warriors have struggled with. I think Jimmy Butler can help with that a lot. And I think this was a really good move for them. Obviously, this isn't going to catapult them into that next tier, but I do think that the Warriors are a winner from this week of NBA trades. A team that I think is a loser is the Hawks, right? The Hawks had to give up a lot of players that I think they would have liked to build around. They're kind of stuck in NBA purgatory right now, where as long as they have Trae Young, which I don't see a world where they end up giving up Trae Young, they're going to continue to be good but not great. They're kind of falling into that trap that the Bulls were with Zach LaVine, except they're a little bit better than the Bulls, right? Trae Young is a guy that I think at this point just needs to find a new home. He doesn't, or the Hawks need to start tanking, right? And I think they started moving towards that tanking side, but not too far, right? This is a Hawks team that's lost 2 games to the Wizards, who, by the way, have now won 3 straight games. Pretty crazy over there in Washington. But I don't like the way that this Hawks team is moving. They seem to be taking big steps into the winning side, and then just a couple seasons later, they're saying, you know what? No, we're going to take a couple steps toward the losing side. I don't love the moves that they made. There's a couple guys that could potentially turn out, but the way that they were making moves at this deadline was more like some of those bottom feeder teams that were trying to stockpile weapons and picks and players and eat salary for these contenders teams. I just don't love the way that they handled this deadline. The final winner that I have, and it's a little bit weird here, but the Charlotte Hornets, I think, did a really good job. What they were able to get as far as compensation for Mark Williams was arguably, at least in draft capital, it was more than what the Mavs were able to get for Luka Doncic, and that's pretty impressive, right? These aren't going to be earth-shattering picks. These aren't going to be earth-shattering trades. But I do like the fact that they were able to stockpile effectively. They didn't have to give up their core that they had. They gave up a great player, one great player in Mark Williams, who is kind of a gamble anyway, because he's had his injury issues. I really do like the way that they handled it. They were able to get the pieces that they need, as well as start to build towards the future. They're in that forever rebuild, but I think they're starting to get close. And I really like the way that they handled this trade deadline. And the final loser that I have, that's the Miami Heat. Yeah, the Miami Heat here were a team that we talked about a little bit earlier on in our show. They just were unable. They were kind of handcuffed by the fact that Jimmy Butler was being loud about everything. He was being dramatic about everything, and he was yelling and screaming and throwing a fit the whole time, right? Jimmy Butler made it incredibly hard for the Heat to trade him, and because of that, the Heat ended up with just a handful of players and one protected first-round pick. The Heat go out there, and they should have gotten more value for Jimmy Butler. All the things that we talk about Jimmy Butler being, he's still a top 15 player in the NBA. He's a guy that can go out there on any given night and be the best player on the court. We've seen it happen many times in the playoffs. He's led this Heat team to a couple of finals appearances. He's upset a plenty of teams. He's been really good when the moment counts the most. And the fact that the Heat were able to get just one okay player in Andrew Wiggins, who can step up as well, and a first-round pick, as well as plenty of assets being sent all over the league, is wild to me. It's not a good look for the Heat, and they were just kind of stuck. They were held hostage by Jimmy Butler. They did the best they could, but I still would have liked to seen them get more. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Who were the biggest winners? Who were the biggest losers of this year's NBA trade deadline? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, some big news around baseball. Pete Alonso has found his new home. We'll talk about where that is and what that means for his new team coming up in the 2025 MLB season. We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, February 6th. If you were just tuning in, we just went over everything you possibly could have wanted to know about the NBA trade deadline. Winners, losers, all of the major news that has happened over the last week or so in the NBA has been crazy. But we went and broke it all down earlier on in our episode. But before in this segment, we're going to take a little bit of a gear shift and take a look at MLB. Some more free agents have found a new home, including Pete Alonso. He finds his way back to the New York Mets. Pitchers and catchers report in just about a week or so. We're going to talk about all of these moves and more in a second. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you'd need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, February 6th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into a little bit of baseball here as we close out our show today here on a Thursday. Couple big signings. We're going to start off with the big one. One of the big ones we have been tracking as the last big piece of the first baseman market has re-signed with the New York Mets. This is one that kind of felt inevitable, but the fact that this negotiation was taking so long, the fact that this negotiation was as hard fought as it was a little bit of a surprise to a lot of people, including myself. Watching Pete Alonso, he was kind of Mr. Met. The Mets go out there this offseason and they seemingly say, hey, we're going to let you go. We're going to go get Juan Soto. They pay Juan Soto over $700 million to go play baseball for them, and Juan Soto absolutely deserves that. But they're able to get back Pete Alonso on a much cheaper and much shorter deal than he was originally expecting. Pete Alonso was expected to sign somewhere around a 7-year deal for around $30 million a year, right? 7 years, $200. He got about that same amount of money, but the length was not nearly as much. The term, just 2 years, $54 million, $27 million a season for Pete Alonso, a guy that has, if you look at his numbers overall as a career, have been one of the better first basemen in Mets history, right? He's been an absolute monster at the plate, and he's slowed down in recent seasons just because his home run numbers haven't quite been the same, but he's still been an elite power hitter, a really solid defender over there at first base, and he's been the face of the franchise for the Mets. The Mets were able to get over that by getting Juan Soto, but that top of that lineup for the Mets is going to be really dangerous. You have Francisco Lindor, a guy that was just second place in the NL MVP voting behind Shohei Ohtani, so just about as good as you possibly could do when Shohei Ohtani is in your league. You've got Mark Vientos, a rookie or second-year player now, who had a lot of huge moments in the playoffs for the Mets, came up huge for them, and their projected lineup is have him hitting third. You've got Juan Soto in that two-hole, and there's not enough nice things you can say about Juan Soto, as he is arguably the best hitter in baseball, arguably just the best pure offensive talent over there, going to go down as one of the best bats in the history of the MLB. You keep Pete Alonso in that cleanup spot at number 4, and his power should come back. He had a couple of huge hits for them, obviously, in the playoffs, keeping them away from elimination in the wild card round against the Brewers. But the rest of that lineup isn't that bad. You've got Brandon Nimmo, Francisco Alvarez, Jesse Winker, Jose Siri, and Jeff McNeil. Jeff McNeil won the batting title not too long ago. Didn't have that great of a season last year, but this is a team that, if they can shore up that pitching staff, especially that bullpen a little bit, they could be really dangerous. They could arguably be the second best team in the NL behind the Dodgers. You get that combo, that big three of Lindor, Soto, and Alonso. That's going to be a murderer's row for any pitching staff to have to get through, and not too bad on the rest of the roster as well. It's a huge get for the Mets, being able to re-sign their franchise first baseman. But another big move came in the form of a return. We saw the Tigers trade Jack Flaherty to the Dodgers, and he went and won a ring over there. Jack Flaherty returns to play for the Tigers here. He's going to step in and be immediately back to his number 2 role. He had a lot of success over there early in the season. He obviously got moved to what eventually became the MLB World Series champions. It was a massive move for the Tigers to get some compensation back, and they're able to get the player that they traded away in the first place. That's always fun when you're able to get that done, but with pitchers and catchers reporting in just about a week now, we're still looking at a couple of other players. Obviously, Alex Bregman still hasn't signed. There's a couple of pitchers that we're still waiting on, but Alex Bregman is the big one. There hasn't been a lot of new updates surrounding Alex Bregman, but since he's not a pitcher or catcher, sometimes those batters are going to take a little bit longer to sign. We obviously saw that happen last season, as a couple free agents waited until basically the end of spring training to sign their contracts. Cody Bellinger being one of those. It might be a similar situation, although that's something to keep an eye on as we get deeper and deeper into the offseason for baseball. But thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in to today's episode of GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. We will be back tomorrow on a Super Bowl Friday, previewing everything that's going on this weekend, and of course, a couple NFL honors things, as that is going on right now. Don't miss any of that. We'll be back tomorrow with all that and more. You guys have a good one. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet.